Good evening, dear children of class 10. Today I shall be dealing with a new poem, The Patriot by Robert Browning. Robert Browning is a very famous Victorian. He was a very famous Victorian poet, and he is mainly popular for his poetic form, the dramatic monologue, where he assumes a character, and this character he speaks some moment that occurred in his life to a silent but an identifiable listener. So like any of his other dramatic monologues, The Patriot is also no exception. This poem revolves around the life of a patriot, and in this poem, we shall be seeing the past and the present state of the patriot. So, without much delay, let's move ahead with the poem. The first verse. It was roses, roses all the way, with myrtle mixed in my path like mad. The house roofs seemed to heave and sway, the church spires flamed, such flags they had a year ago on this very day. So here we are being given the information by the patriot of what happened on this date exactly a year ago in his life, when he was looked upon as if he was a godlike figure. He was adulated, or he was adulated by his people, how he was admired by his people after having achieved a great victory for his countrymen. And on his return, his people, his countrymen welcomed, they gave him a very grand reception, gave a very pompous welcome to this patriot after having achieved great victory for his country. And he was welcomed in such a grand manner that these people, his countrymen, they threw roses and myrtles everywhere to show their love, their warmth, their respect for the patriot. And these two flowers that has been mentioned, roses and myrtles, it symbolizes their love and respect, the love and respect that his countrymen had for this patriot of whom we are talking about, who's giving us the information that what had happened a year ago in his life. So these are the things that had happened in his life, and his people, and they were so excited. They were so excited. They were throwing roses and myrtles. The streets were filled with people. The rooftops were filled with people. They were waiting out there to have a glimpse of their hero, who was returning after having achieved great victory. And the church spires, they were so happy that even the church spires were decorated with bright colored flowers, and it looked as if the entire church spires were set aflame. And this is exactly what had happened a year ago in the life of the patriot. Now in the second verse, the air broke into the mist with bells, the old walls rocked with the crowd and cries. Had I said, good folks, mere noise repels, but give me your son from yonder skies, they had answered, and afterwards what else? So, and the people, they were so happy. Further informs that the people, they were so happy, they were so excited, that the minute they saw him, they immediately rang the bell in order to inform the entire city about his arrival, to announce his arrival. And the old walls rocked with the crowd and cries. The entire atmosphere was filled with excitement and loud cries, as if it seemed as if they were in complete frenzy and in madness. So, and if they were so happy that if he had asked them even for the son, they would have been ready. They would have readily given that to him. And out here, when he says, and afterwards in the last two lines of the second verse. But give me your son from yonder skies, they had answered, and afterwards what else? So this is a very beautiful example and instance of exaggeration that beautifully expresses the mood of the crowd, where they are extremely happy, and they are so happy that they would be ready to do anything and everything for their hero had he demanded anything from them. So then, moving on, then the next verse, the third verse, Alak, it was I who leaped at the sun to give it my loving friends to keep. So, out here from this verse onwards, we see a certain change in his mood from the happy recollection to a sad moment, and that is identified by the very first usage of this word, a lack. So it was I who leaped at the sun. So here what he is trying to say is that he did everything, every possible thing in the public's best interest for his people. He did everything. He tried to achieve everything for his people. And here this line is quite significant because it gives it makes a mythological reference to the figure Icarus, the son of Daedalus, who while trying to reach the sun, he plunges into his own death because the wax in his wings, it melts the heat of the sun. As he goes higher, as he flies higher, the heat of the sun melts the wax, and the feathers of his wax falls apart, and he plunges into his own death. So he too, that is the Patriot, to try to do every possible thing for the best interest of his people. And what happened? But eventually he received nothing but hatred from his people. He received something that he had completely not expected. In fact, he had received the capital punishment, that was death sentence. So, to give my loving friends to keep, not man could do, have I left undone. And you see my harvest, what I reap, this very day, now a year is run. So, he did every possible thing for his people's best interest, which no man could do or had ever done. And you see my harvest here, the harvest here is now, he's making mention to the punishment that the harsh treatment that he has received from that very set of people, from those very people for whom he had done so much. So what we see out here is that this man, he had sowed loyalty, he had sowed love, he had sowed honor, he had sowed patriotism for his people, but in return, what did he reap? He reaped nothing but humiliation. He reaped nothing but betrayal. He reaped nothing but ingratitude. These people were so ungrateful that now, when he was about to be punished, when he was about to be punished, there was nobody to save him. So all these things had happened a year ago, and after a year he was being punished. That is the idea that we get in this third verse. There's nobody on the housetops now, just a palsied few at the windows set. So see the sharp contrast that we see out here in this fourth verse. What we saw in the beginning was that the entire street and the house rooftops were filled with people who were there rejoicing and eagerly waiting to have a glimpse of their hero, to give him a grand welcome. And they were so happy, they were so excited, they were so happy with what he had done for them, that they were ready to do anything and everything for him had he asked for it. And now, exactly a year after, on that very date, what we see is that the entire city, that very city, is completely empty. There's not a soul on the street, not even on the rooftops. There are a few people, but those people are those people who could not walk because they were paralyzed, and these people, they were watching him from their respective windows. And why? What had happened? Where were these people? These people, remember, these very set of people who had welcomed him, who had given him a grand welcome, these people had gathered at the shambles gate or the scaffold's foot. They were waiting for him to be executed. This shambles gate, it is a place of gathering where it's a place of gathering for execution. And scaffold's foot is a wooden platform where people were executed. So they were waiting out there. And here we see the drastic change in the people. So this is a very ironical reference out here when we shall move ahead to the third line of this fourth verse, where he says, for the best of the sight, the best of the sight. This reference is very, very ironical, because the best of the sight here refers to the execution, the execution of the speaker. So it is ironical. Why? Because these very people who had been there a year ago to welcome him are now waiting for him at the scaffold's foot, wanting and waiting for him to be executed. So now let's move ahead with the fifth verse. I go in the rain, and more than needs, a rope cuts both my wrists behind. So we see the present condition of this patriot. It is raining, it is pouring, and what more do we see about him? This man, both his hands were tied by a rope, and the rope was so tightly tied around his wrist that it had completely cut his wrist. And not just that, we also are informed that this man was wounded, his head was bleeding. Why? Because the people, the very set of people who loved, adulated him, welcomed him, gave him a pompous welcome, who were ready to do anything and give him anything and everything that he would ask for, these very people had changed their side. They had hated him. They had started hating him. They had tied him. They had imprisoned him, and they wanted him to be executed. And then, because of this hatred, they had even pelted stones at him, and now he was bleeding. We see him bleeding, and I think, by the feel, my forehead bleeds, for they fling means throw, for they fling whoever has a mind stones at me for my year's misdeed. So now, the minute he makes mention of his year's misdeed, the question arises, what misdeed exactly did he do? Because at the initial, when we were introduced, when we hear from the patriot, we see that the poet has presented him as an innocent figure. But all throughout we are shown that this patriot is an innocent figure until we reach the last line of this fifth verse, where he makes mention that he was being pelted the people had pelted stones at him for his, why? Because of his year's misdeed. It makes this poem quite ambiguous, because no mention has been made as in what misdeed he did do. Whether he had done something illegal, whether he had tried to act in a very patriotic manner, but again, which people did not like, nor did they approve of, or whether he was completely an innocent man, but just that he was completely framed wrongly by the political mechanization. It could be anything, but nothing has been made mention, no mention has been made as in what exactly did he or wrong did he do. So thereby adding to the ambiguity of this poem. So now moving to the last verse. Thus I entered and thus I go. In triumph people have dropped down dead, paid by by the world. What dost thou owe me? So he out here is he makes mention that thus I entered and thus I go. So now as he's about to he's proceeding towards the scaffold's foot where he will be executed, he says that as he entered he will soon part away from where and from whom? From this mortal world. He shall go to his everlasting life after death. And he makes a reference that in triumph, like him, in triumph people often are punished, and for which he is quite unhappy about, and for which he is quite regretful and unhappy about. But in spite of it, he makes a very optimistic reference to what he believes. In spite of being thrown in the midst of such such tragedy, he is quite optimistic, because he has this optimistic belief that no matter, even if he does not receive any form of justice in this mortal world, definitely after his death in the afterlife he will definitely receive justice from God. So when he says this, through this through the Patriot, Browning actually he sends across a message that defeat can be turned into victory, despair can be turned into hope, sorrow can be turned into joy, and by doing so, what we see is Browning's unflinching belief and faith in God's justice. So, and this is the exact belief that the Patriot too had, which makes him feel secure and safer. He feels safer and secure in the world, that is the world after life. Thank you very much.